Hello, my name is Ade and welcome to another tutorial for RPG All-in-One. This video will be covering items and creating them. So if you go to your items menu and go to options, you can have a look at some of the options we can change here, which changes how the items we create are handled. So we have loot drop sound, so any item that's dropped will play this sound, whether damage has variance or not. So if it's unticked, then damage will always hit the same value, whereas as it's ticked now, damage can hit between two different values, for example 5 and 10. We can enable two-handed weapons, offhands, dual wielding. We can say how much our dual wielded weapon does. So for example, if on our offhand we have another sword and it does 50 damage, a ratio of 1 will mean that it still does 50 damage, whereas if we set this to 0.5, then our offhand weapon will only do 50% of its damage. Whether we can remove sockets from items, we can limit items by class, so for example only a warrior could use a certain weapon, and whether or not items have required levels, and if we want to play audiobooks when we loot them, which we'll cover in a moment. So here we can also define our apparel slots. So we might additionally have a slot for our helmet, maybe we have a slot for earrings, and we can also define prefabs for them, which we'll cover just down here in a second. So we can also define weapon types, so we can have a default weapon type, or perhaps we'll have a weapon type for an axe. Again, we can generate a prefab for our axes, so let's do that real quick. So if we click generate prefab, that will make an object for us in our scene. So anytime an axe is dropped, this is what's going to drop. It's this little cube here. But obviously we can change that. We have some objects here from dungeon props. Don't think we have any axes, but we can use this torch for example. So we set it as a child, delete this cube, and for some reason the torch is all the way up there, so we kind of want to move that down, and there we go. So it's inside of that sphere collider. So anytime an axe drops now, it's going to drop this as long as we hit apply. Okay, so we can do that for all of our different ground prefabs, and we can have defaults for item types, we can have defaults for weapon types, as well as defaults for apparel types. And we'll also see in a second that we can have defaults for individual items. So the next thing we can do is we can change the attack style of different weapons. For example, we can have a normal axe, and we can create an additional one called a two-handed axe. And this one might attack slightly slower. It might have slightly increased range, and it will be marked as two-handed. And again, we can create a custom ground prefab for that, as well as custom impacts, impact sounds, and melee effects for when you actually swing the weapon. Next we have ground prefabs, which we covered above. So again, we have a default for just everything, and then we can set up defaults for the different item types. Next we can define a bunch of rarities, so we can have commons, we can have rares, we can have legendaries or legendary, and each of them assigned a unique color. We can change our item type names for use in the UI, as well as our consumable active types, and we can define how our inventory works. So for example, our inventory has 20 max items. We can also enable a weight system, which means that each item will have a certain weight, and we can allow the character to carry over the max weight, but if they're carrying too much, then they move at 40% of their normal movement speed. We can also define how our stash works, as well as crafting, whether we can craft anywhere by pressing the crafting key, whether we need a certain trait level to craft items. For example, you might need a certain gathering level to craft a level 5 craftable item. We can also set our crafting sound, how long it takes to craft items, and whether or not we scale our craft lists and dismantles by slot. So let's go and create some items. So let's start off with an apparel item. So apparel items have a name, so we'll give it a name. We'll give us the chest piece of heroes, and that will go in your chest slot. It'll require level 2. and we'll say this was found in a great temple. We can then set its rarity, how much it weighs, how much it sells for, and how much you have to spend to buy it. Whether or not you can drop the item, typically that should be yes. And maybe you can run an event when you use it. And so you can define some events and run that event, for example a cutscene, etc. You can define a custom ground prefab like we spoke about earlier, how many socket slots it has, whether you set custom variables when you equip it or unequip it, which again you can use in events or nodes or dialogue. For example, when you equip this weapon, you might set a variable called, let's say, has legendary swords, and that'll be a boolean. And so if we go back to our item, when you equip it, we set it to true, and when you unequip it, we set it to false. You can then add some attribute buffs. So maybe this weapon gives 100 strength, maybe it also gives 100 dexterity. We can add some statistic buffs, might give 25% additional movement speed. It might also give you 50% fire resistance. Similarly, we can add vital buffs, so it might give you an additional 500 health. You can add some status reductions, so if you get burnt, we can decrease it by 50%. So if it's a 10-second burn, it will only last for 5 seconds. And we can do stuns and decrease stuns by 1, so it just makes you never get stunned. We can add vital regen bonuses, so maybe you regenerate an additional 10% health every second. We can make it give you an immunity to status impairment, or perhaps make you take additional damage from status impairments, for example 50% additional. And that covers creating an apparel. All we need for it now is an icon. So let's create a weapon. So if we scroll down here, we'll notice that equipables typically have the same kind of customization options, as well as weight, rarity, sell price, etc. So the key differences here, if we give us a name real quick, we can choose a weapon type. We need to define how much damage it does, and we can also override its range or attack speed. So the default attack speed of an axe can be changed here. So maybe we want this axe to attack really fast, and again we need the description. An icon. Let's put this one, and it'll have a rarity, etc. That's how you create a weapon. So maybe you want all of your weapons to give strength. Maybe this one gives 1,000. Our next item is a consumable. So this one's slightly different. We have the same item details pretty much. So we'll call this one large health potion. Give it an icon. So we have two different types of consumables. We have instant and time-based. So an instant consumable, when you use it, it will instantly restore your health. So if you have 100 health and you have a consumable that restores 50, then you'll instantly have 150 health. Whereas a time-based one can add that 50 health over 5 seconds. So maybe we'll add 10 health every second. So you can just add a bit of variety that way. So you can choose which vital it restores. So perhaps this one restores mana, or perhaps it restores health. And you can choose whether it restores a fixed amount or if it restores a percentage. So a fixed amount is like 100 and the percentage is like 0.5, so I restore 50% of the player's health. You can also choose whether it adds a status effect. Maybe it adds enlightened, or maybe it removes a status effect, so it removes burning. So whenever you use this consumable, you're no longer burning. And then you can add a cooldown to the item. Maybe this consumable can only be used every 10 seconds. If we switch it to time-based, we can see we have quite a few of the same variables. However, we have a duration of how long this consumable will tick for. So let's say it lasts for 5 seconds. And if we set the seconds between restore to 0.1, we'll realize that we have 50 different restores that will occur. Whereas if we set it to 1, we'd only have 5 restores that occur. So let's set it to 1, and let's say every time it restores health, it will restore 10% of the player's health. So that in total is going to restore 50% of the player's health. Hopefully you're keeping up. And again, we can add or remove a status effect and add a cooldown. So our next item type is a material. So this one's quite simple. These are just used for like crafting. So we can say like linen. Simple crafting material. Maybe it weighs only 0.1. Sells for 50, buy it for 100. Give it an icon. Let's see here. And we can use that later. We also have sockets. So sockets you can put into different pieces of apparels or weapons. And they essentially just give attribute buffs, statistic buffs, etc. which we covered in the other items. We also have books. So books are quite interesting. I actually resize the window for this one. So again, for the item details, we've covered all of these. Let's add an icon. So let's say this is a book about how to be an adventurer. Okay, so we have 3 different types of books. We have textbooks, picture books, and audio books. So we'll start with text. So, how to be an adventurer. And the author is some dude. So, textbook. So our first page will have some text. Step 1. Play the game. Step 2, win. And we can add another page. Actually, you need to level up. And we can add one more page and say the end. So we have 3 pages to this book. Page 1, page 2, and page 3. And that is basically how our book works. So I'll show off how all of these items work inside of the game in regards to these books. We can then go to picture. So a picture book has a width and height, and then we want to add a bunch of pictures to it. So let's say the first picture is, I don't think we have any good examples, but we'll use these. So add 2 more pages, add a different kind of color, and once again different kind of color. So we have 3 pages to that picture book. And finally we can do an audio book. And so when we use this item, it's gonna play some kind of audio. So we'll just use this battle music as our example. All we can do is we can click this icon here to duplicate this book. So the first one we'll set to our text, second one to picture, and third one to audio. And we could just prefix these. Like so. Okay, and finally we have our miscellaneous, which is just a non-stacking item that you can use for whatever purposes you want, really. So let's delete that one. Again, we've covered all of the item details, so that should be understandable. So let's go to our dinosaur that we created earlier in another tutorial, and we're just going to change our guaranteed loot to drop those audiobooks. We don't have to worry about the gold. Okay, so let's have a look at those audiobooks. Right, so here we have our 3 items, our books that we created. So let's try the textbook first. So you can see there, we have our textbook opening with our 3 pages. Obviously you can customize this UI to your liking, which we'll explain in another video. There's our audiobook, playing that RPG battle music. And we can hit stop. Obviously for your game, you would want to have some kind of dialogue or something similar. And then we also have our picture book with our 3 pictures. And again, you can customize the UI to your liking. And so there we go, that covers our items and how to go about creating them. If you want more information on RPG AIL, check out the tutorials and other videos in the playlist link below in the description, and have a wonderful day.